Hello everyone. So what I'm doing in this session is actually just providing you some context about climate change. So I'm not particularly going to talk about events in this one, but just to set the background. Now this is probably material that many of you will know really well, so just have a quick listen through. But for some of you it might be material you might need to listen a little bit more carefully to. So first of all, I just want to give a bit of background of what climate change is, and actually people are often quite muddled about what it actually is, and the definition there is any change in climate over time, whether due to natural variability or as a result of human activity. That's from the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, back from their report in 2015. And so it isn't just something that's human induced, it can be natural variability as well. But what the IPCC organisation have indicated is that the warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Something is happening, something is causing a change. And generally at the moment this is due to human activity. Now you can see in the graph at the bottom of the table there, this looks at differences in temperatures above or below the average between 1961 and 1990. And if you look at the where the zero line goes through, you can see that pre about 1975, it was largely lower. Okay, and then since 1970, 1975, we've been seeing this steady increase in temperature. And so they talk about this global average temperature anomaly, and that comes from very different organisations, and the source there is from the UK Met Office. So what we're seeing as a result of this human-induced climate change, which has been linked to the Industrial Revolution period onwards, and also much more recent use of fossil fuels, is all these kinds of changes. So sea level rise, but other things as well. So sea level rise is the one that people often most think about. But now what is becoming much more apparent is that there are significant changes in our weather patterns. So you can see there wind patterns, and this might affect where tropical storms go, and temperature patterns. And what we're seeing is more extreme hot nights, and also some more extreme cold nights and cold days. So it's actually at both ends of the temperature spectrum. And within Europe particularly, there have been a lot more hot nights. So for example, I think it was a year or so ago, there was a really serious heat wave, and a significant number of nights, for instance, in France that were 40 degrees or above, or days when it was 40 degrees, and that led to very hot nights, which causes extra problems for people with certain health conditions and older people. And then there's this increased risk of heat waves, so that was an example from France, and also droughts, but also, so you get both sides again, not just droughts, but also heavy precipitation events, so heavy rainfall. And then there's some contraction in snow cover, and increasing in thawing of permafrost in the Arctic, and decreasing the extent of sea ice. Now, some of these, particularly if you just think about these weather changes, weather has quite a significant implication for the events management industry, particularly for outdoor events. So that's something that we've become very aware of in that sector. And for instance, the contraction in snow cover, this has had implications for some winter sports events, and even the Vancouver Olympics, there were problems in terms of the snow came very late. So, it can actually have an impact on some major events. But what we see is that basically some systems, some sectors, some regions of the world are going to be more especially affected by climate change. So in terms of who will be affected, and this is in terms of where the most major early impacts will be seen, is it tends to be in the poorer parts of the globe. And this impact is related to three things. One is where they are positioned, so geographically they're in areas which are vulnerable. There is a very high dependence on agriculture for incomes, livelihoods, and that can be affected by changes in temperatures, storms, etc. And because of low incomes, they have relatively low adaptive capacity. So that means that developing countries tend to be much more significantly impacted. And I'm trying to frame this as, we tend to think of climate change as something that impacts on the environment, but it's much more than that, because actually this threat to food supply, water stress, this actually directly affects people and alters people's livelihoods, and we are beginning to see some large-scale migration and poverty that is now being attributed to climate change. If we look at the regions affected, so there's the Arctic is one of the regions, and there's Africa. And in Africa, it's particularly because of this low adaptive capacity alongside the climate change impacts. Then you have small island states, and these are often have a lot of exposed population sort of living around sea level, and have challenges in terms of building infrastructure to try to avoid climate change. Things like the Asian and African megadeltas, so probably the most common one, the one you're most likely to be aware of would be the Bangladeshi megadelta, which routinely gets flooded. And it has a lot of population there, very large population, very high exposure to sea level rise, and they already routinely suffer from river flooding, but also storm surges in that area, that region. So they're particularly problematic. Got an example here from tourism to show you the sort of extent of changes we're already seeing. So this might be a place that some of you know. This is in Chamonix in France, Montenvers, which is the Montenvers to Mer de Glace railway. So this was built in the Victorian era so that tourists could actually go and view this glacier. Now, if you look at the picture there, you can see the glacier in the bottom of the valley, but you can also see from the barren rock around it, the glacier was much higher. And bear in mind, this railway station is up on the right-hand side here, was really built so that people could access the glacier. It sort of looks slightly in the wrong place now. And if I just show you the map, you can see from this map the railways at Montenvers up there, 1,913 metres. But actually, they've now had to build a cable car to take people down to nearer the glacier. And then, since they've built the cable car, which I think might date back to about the 1970s, they've had to build a pathway going down the cliffside to actually get to the Mer de Glace. And in the Mer de Glace each year they build an ice grotto that you can actually go and walk in. I went there a few years ago with my son. But it's quite dramatic when you think that station up there was built to view this glacier, which now is, a long way down from where that originally was. And, this is something that we're seeing all over the world, is retreat of glaciers. And actually, I'm aware in China, from an academic who was visiting over there, that one of their glaciers has retreated so much that it's 20 miles away from the tourist site, the tourist town that was originally set up so people could go and see the glacier. So it's, completely failing now. In terms of what's happened in the UK, because the UK has got some quite good climate change legislation, various key reports kicked this off to start with. So there was the Stern report, which is the name of the economist who wrote the report. And this, basically in 2006, it flagged that if we didn't do something about climate change early, it was going to cost a lot more money to actually deal with the impacts in the future. And so Stern highlighted the economic benefits of acting on climate change earlier, and did quite a lot to leverage the UK government into acting and creating the Climate Change Act in 2008. And then there was also the IPCC report in 2007 on climate change. And these together triggered the UK government to introduce the Climate Change Act. And this set a target of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, based on a 1990 baseline. And then subsequently, in 2009, this has been amended. So you have this slightly long Climate Change Act 2008 in brackets 2050 target amendment order. This amended the Climate Change Act to go from actually having this target of an 80% reduction to 100% reduction. And this is often referred to as the Net Zero Act. And in the UK, the net zero, this idea of net zero, it's actually an explicit economic policy, because one of the things that the government sees is there could be benefits for the UK of actually moving swiftly on climate change. In other words, it's about getting competitive advantage. And the idea in part is to not only reduce climate change, but also will stimulate economic activity in areas such as energy generation from renewable sources. Which could benefit the UK economy, and also to stimulate industry generally to act on this. So, for instance, thinking about the events sector in terms of how live events are run, how they use energy, that actually they will reduce that demand, and that can lead to economic advantages in terms of reducing costs. I've mentioned this right at the start of the unit about how the UK hopes to achieve this net zero, and you can see from the pie chart there 38% is to do with low carbon technologies, and another 9%, the green bit, is societal or behavioural changes, and then 53% is a combination of the two. And I'm a little bit sceptical. My research is all about societal and behavioural changes in order to try to address climate change. So I'm quite sceptical we're going to achieve this, because there's a lot of work to do in that area. In terms of international agreements, you may have heard of the UN Framework on Climate Change, which goes back to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, which sort of set out the initial framework on climate change. And then you will also, aware that there's frequently referred to COP. So there was COP21, which is in Paris, 2015. This is the Conference of the Parties, and this is a regular meeting. There was one due to be held this year in Glasgow, but it's been postponed for a year because of COVID. Back in 2015, there was the meeting in Paris. Managed to gain a lot of support from almost all the parties who came along to the conference on commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce carbon emissions. And so, that was trying to limit temperature rise to less than 2 degrees centigrade. I've said but at the bottom because the US has been trying to withdraw, and this largely depends on what happens in the election. So by the time you listen to this, probably the election will have taken place and we might know. But Donald Trump indicated, I think back in 2017, that he wanted America to withdraw from this, but there is a 4-year period, there is a time period they have to stick to. And I know that some decision has to be taken, a final decision, after the American election. So we will know whether they have actually withdrawn or not, and that will largely depend on whether Donald Trump comes to power. So that gives you a bit of background to climate change.